Well, Phyllis Bennis is a Middle East specialist and a fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies. She's also the author of the book Understanding Palestine and Israel. She joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for taking time to talk to us. Can I ask you then, what do you think this means then for US-Israel elections, given what Netanyahu's essentially said?
Well, it certainly isn't surprising that Netanyahu's decision is we simply aren't going to follow what we said we would, only hinting what they would have done before. In Trump's own statement, he said that this agreement was going to be carried out in what he called carefully structured phases. And he talked about how the disarmament of Hamas and the withdrawal of Israeli forces would go on together. They would be simultaneous in these structured phases. And then Netanyahu says, no, we're not going to do that. There's clearly two parts to this. One is, as we were hearing in Noor's report and Patty Culhane's report as well, about the elections, the election here in the US that's coming up, and the election inside Israel, where Netanyahu is under enormous pressure, both from his electoral coalition in the Knesset and public opinion, which is very much in support of his very hardline position. But there's also the question of the reality that the so-called pressure from the United States is simply in the arena of words. It's only statements. And we've seen this from the beginning of the genocide in Gaza back in 2023, when we saw requests from the White House, whether it was from President Biden and then later President Trump, to say, please stop killing so many Palestinians. Please negotiate seriously. But without any pressure, any real pressure behind that. What that would have to mean is saying there will be no more U.S. arms transfers to Israel, period, full stop. There will be no more military aid to Israel, period, full stop. You know, this is what makes the genocide, which is still going on in Gaza, possible. It's the support from the United States, support diplomatically in the United Nations, protection from the International Criminal Court, et cetera. The reality is the pressure is growing on President Trump and the Republicans, partly with the report we were just hearing about how much support for Israel has become a partisan issue in the United States. Not only the question of support for Israel or not, but AIPAC money, the biggest component of the Jewish sector of the pro-Israel lobby. There are many sectors of that lobby, but AIPAC has been one of the most powerful. Their money is now toxic among a huge sector of candidates, particularly Democratic Party candidates, who know that if they accept AIPAC money, it will discredit them in the eyes of their own base, the base of their own party. So the fact that Hamas made this major concession to agree to full disarmament, but clearly only to be carried out in cooperation, in parallel with an Israeli withdrawal, as we heard from Noor a few minutes ago, the Israelis are not only not beginning a withdrawal, they are taking more land in Gaza, consolidating their control of land in Lebanon, et cetera. So we're looking at a very, very dangerous moment where this is now what could look like a stalemate, but it's a stalemate where the current reality is that of genocide. You know, there have been 1,100 people killed in Gaza by Israeli strikes just since the so-called peace deal, the ceasefire deal, was passed in October of last year.
Yeah.
So I mean, the notion that the genocide is over is simply not the case. And if there's just a stall, if it goes into stalemate, that means the genocide is continuing. This was what's so dramatically dangerous about this.
Well, as you said, Netanyahu's primary concern is popular opinion in Israel. Same for Donald Trump in the United States. So what tools then do the United States have? What tools does Donald Trump have to kind of force the border peace to then move to the next stage?
Well, I don't think he's going to be able to force the board of peace to move, because those governments have made very clear they have no intention of, for example, the countries that have agreed to send troops to be part of this so-called international stabilization force under the supervision of the Board of Peace. They won't do that until the process of Israeli withdrawal and Hamas disarmament is complete. So that he doesn't have any basis to be pressuring them. It's possible that the Board of Peace countries, which includes a number of Arab countries across the region, other Muslim countries, both regional and international, that they could put pressure on Trump to, in turn, pressure Israel. Whether Trump is prepared to do that in terms of his own assessment of where his base lies, and his base tends to be divided on the question of whether or not to support Israel. Mainstream Republican support is strong. Mainstream of the old version of the Republican Party, the MAGA movement, so-called, the Make America Great Again movement that supports Trump most powerfully, they are divided over the question of Israel. Increasingly, the Democratic Party is more and more unified against support for Israel. So the question of how that gets defined by Trump's political advisors, we simply don't know yet. There is the possibility that there could be real pressure put on Israel to say, no more money, no more weapons, and we're taking off the agenda this notion, this very dangerous notion that is now on the agenda, having been passed in the House of Representatives as part of the military budget, to embrace the U.S. and Israeli militaries and the military producers. They want to make that a much tighter relationship, to say that's not on the agenda anymore. No more money, no more weapons, and no more deals to be closer until or unless Israel goes ahead with what they had originally agreed to in terms of a structured, phased withdrawal.
But when you said potentially pressure put on Israel, do you have a timeline? Would anything happen before the elections and the midterms?
I think it's very unlikely. You asked me what could happen. I'm saying this could happen. Do I think it will happen? Unfortunately, no. But I think that leads to a further stalemate facing the not only the Republican Party, not only the White House, not only President Trump himself, but in the context of an apparent stalemate emerging in the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran. These are not wars that are popular in the United States, in either party. And there has been a great effort by the Trump administration to try and end the war with Iran, the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran, in time to rebuild consciousness in the U.S. that we're not at war anymore, something that he promised when he came into office. I'm against these permanent wars, he said. Turns out he's not so much against them. He's actually carrying one out and enabling another. So I think that there is a serious problem facing the elections. We don't know how he's going to respond to that. Some of it may be that he's more concerned about his own reputation, his own popularity, than that of his Republican colleagues in terms of their elections that are coming up just in a few months, that he's looking ahead only to 2028 and what happens to his reputation at that point, rather than worrying about which Republicans get elected to either the House or the Senate in November of this year.
Phyllis Bennis, a Middle East specialist and fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies, talking to us there from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much.
Thank you.